How to Stop Feeling Like Shit by Andrea Owen. Chapter 1. Being an asshole to yourself. Learn to manage your inner critic. You look like death ran over you. That's cute that you think you'd be up for that promotion. A bikini? Yeah, right, not in this lifetime. Have you ever been in a verbally abusive relationship? One in which the other person constantly criticizes you, thinks you are never good enough, and always makes you feel terrible. A relationship in which you start doubting yourself and believing all the mean things the other person says to you and about you. Or maybe you haven't been in this type of relationship, but you know someone who has. And it was so excruciatingly painful to watch. And oh, how I wish I were talking about someone else, but I'm talking about the way you speak to yourself. Even if you have never had someone speak to you in this manner, I will bet that you speak to yourself this way at times or all the time. That your inner dialogue is less than loving. For instance, how do you speak to yourself when you see your reflection after you step out of the shower? Or when you make a mistake? Or when you get passed over for a promotion? Or when you start comparing yourself to other women? In those instances, is your self talk kind, compassionate, like a warm blanket just out of the dryer that smells like love? I kind of doubt it. I start with this chapter because your inner voice, or what is often rightly described as your inner critic, is the most common behavior women engage in that makes them feel like shit. Take Valerie, a 31-year-old hairdresser. I tell myself quite often that I'm fat, and this is the reason I'm still single. As my 32nd birthday approaches, I'm constantly criticizing my food choices and second guessing most of my decisions. My friends are getting married and having kids, and I'm always comparing myself to them, feeling like I don't measure up. If I were thinner, more outgoing, more something, I would have had a successful relationship by now. Part of my job is to look nice, and people tell me often I look pretty, but I never believe them. I feel like they are just making polite conversation. Valerie's story is a common one, comparing herself to everyone else. More on that in chapter 4. And believing her happiness depends on something outside herself she needs to attain. Sometimes the inner critic can be extremely harsh, as in Suzanne's case. I spent most of my life in a place of wanting to take care of everyone else in the world, and to hell with me. I never feel as important. I speak to myself in a way that I never would speak to another human being. Self compassion and self love are non existent. If I mess up in some way as normal people do, it's not just a mistake. I tell myself I'm horrible, stupid, fat, and ugly, and a total failure as a person, woman, wife, friend, sibling, you name it. I suck at it. I wallow in that awful place and take those words as absolute truth. My brain knows they aren't true, but that makes no difference. The shame of those feelings and then the self destructive methods I have of burying that shame is just an awful place to be. And I pretty much feel helpless to pull out of it, even with my therapist. For the record, the inner critic doesn't always sound like an actual inner monologue or articulation of thoughts. Some women report that their inner critic is more of an overall feeling of not enoughness, a nagging suspicion that everyone else has their shit together and they don't. That wash of I'm not like the others. If you can't relate to the stories about internal monologues, then maybe this is you. When you think about going after something big, you automatically assume it won't go well, so you don't do it. Maybe you compare yourself to other women without registering it in words or specifics. It's as if this board of directors of your life that you didn't appoint has come together to have a meeting about your value, and you believe their evaluation that you are suffering by comparison to others. Where does it come from? Where does this voice come from? The gutters of hell? Well, actually, yes. It comes from a miserable little town in hell where the mayor is a jackass. I'm kidding, of course. But read on to discover the most common instigators of self criticism. Family. The first source of your inner critic is often your family of origin. Some of you may look back on your upbringing as a graveyard littered with painful memories, and others may not remember the kind of pain that brings you to your knees, but more subtle experiences. Being a parent myself, I can absolutely see where this comes from. We want our children to fit in, we want them to achieve, we want them to feel confident, we want to help them escape as much pain as possible of the trials and tribulations of growing up, right? We don't wake up every morning and think, how can I make my kid not feel good enough? No, we are well meaning, and what ends up happening is that in an effort to help them fit in and avoid struggle, we sometimes inadvertently make them feel inadequate as they are. Take Heather's story, for example. My inner critic comes out regarding body image and my physical appearance. I have struggled with this since I was a little girl. I grew up in a household where there was great emphasis on outward appearance. I remember being 7 years old and hating my body. My mother, I don't blame her, she was doing the best she could at the time, wanted to dress me, wanted to cut my hair, give me perms. Yes, it was the 1980s, and totally against my wishes, I let her. I remember being very self conscious about my appearance and extremely judgmental of myself. Self criticism was definitely in play as I reached my teens, and looking back, I realized that my worthiness as a person was completely contingent upon my physical appearance. I fed upon attention from anyone who thought I was attractive, especially boys. If someone thought I was pretty, I was worthy of love. It was intoxicating, that feeling of worthiness. This is still a struggle in my 40s. So when my inner critic speaks up, it's the voice of fear saying, you better lose 5 pounds and fix those wrinkles or you're not good enough. I know what I look like does not define who I am. But these fears and feelings are so ingrained that it takes daily reminders to change these thoughts and behaviors. I want to emphasize the very last sentence Heather said about knowing logically that her appearance doesn't define who she is, but needing to work daily on not believing it because her fears and feelings are so ingrained. Y'all, the inner critic runs deep. That is why I go on and on and on and on about this work being a constant, daily effort and not just a one night stand. It takes lots of practice to undo this. Along with your family crap, or maybe instead of it, you may have inner critic noise that stems from past or even current relationships. As I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter, verbally abusive relationships can stay with you long after you have broken up. Or maybe your partner wasn't necessarily abusive but made snide comments about your appearance, your intelligence, or anything about you. He or she may have passed the comments off as jokes or teasing, but deep down they have embedded themselves into your belief system. Culture. The second place your inner critic stems from could be your culture. This is one of those girl, don't get me started topics. But it must be addressed because it's just too powerful a force to ignore. The truth is, we live in a culture that profits from women not feeling good enough, beautiful enough, thin enough, everything enough. Big companies make big money from this notion. It helps the economy. Many would argue that some religions prefer that women feel small and not enough as a way of keeping them in line. Sometimes this is a class issue. In my early 20s, I dated a guy who grew up in an affluent town near me. It was where the rich kids lived. He had graduated from the University of California at Berkeley and was getting his MBA. Somehow, the topic of work and what we wanted for our future came up, and I mentioned my associate's degree in fashion merchandising. He chuckled and nonchalantly said, "Is that even a real degree?" The look of horror on my face prompted him to quickly backpedal and apologize, but the message was clear. I wasn't good enough for him, or good enough at all. Even if he truly didn't mean it, he did. He was an ass. In a culture that values things like where you come from and where you go to school, comments like that run deep, create beliefs about ourselves and are hard to shake. Things like the way we look create triggers for our inner critic, as do things like class and status. Equally as important but not talked about as much are ethnicity and sexuality. One of my colleagues, Andrea Johnson, says, in my experience, being black and a woman, some of the negative self talk I have taken on is that I'm dangerous. Being angry isn't okay. And I should have everything together because that is what's projected onto us from childhood on. Why does it even matter how I talk to myself? Maybe the negative self-talk has become second nature to you. You might be thinking, so what? If I'm kind to other people, does it really matter if I'm kind to myself? In a word, yes. The obvious or maybe not so obvious reason is that when you aren't compassionate with yourself and you make it a habit to betray yourself and talk poorly to yourself, you feel like shit. Maybe not a walking around with your head down and tail between your legs feeling, but if you beat yourself up on a regular basis, it takes its toll on your overall happiness, your self-confidence and your self-esteem. Plus, it bleeds into other areas of your life and fuels the desire for perfectionism, the need for control, the desire to hide out, and many of the other habits you will read about in this book. And if you have children, or are in a relationship, or have friends, that is everyone, self compassion is a tool that is universally necessary for having better relationships and, in my humble opinion, has the capacity to move mountains. If more people were nicer to themselves, the whole world would change. How to fix it? Now that you know what beating yourself up looks like, where it may have come from, and what it's doing to you, let's move on with how to not be an asshole to yourself, shall we? In a nutshell, here is the process of practicing kindness and compassion toward yourself and moving your inner critic out of ruling you. I'll dig into each one. First, noticing the negative self talk. I know, bear with me here. Second, knowing your triggers. Third, committing to the process, practicing the tools, and always being in the process. The solution is to start with recognition. Recognize where your inner voice is being a prick. Hear it and see it. Awareness is half the battle. If you don't know what is there and when it happens, you will just go on listening and believing. Once you identify the bullshit, you can put it where it belongs and flush it away. Recognizing it to change it. A lot of women tell me that they don't even know the negative self talk is happening until they are eyeball deep in it, or they have listened to it for so long that they are used to it and buy into it as their truth. I often tell people the hardest part of this work is uncovering exactly what's going on before you learn the tools to change it. Why? Because surprise, we don't like to feel. I say we because if there was let's just think and do our way through personal development club, I would be the president. But I've learned that we must think, do, and feel our way through the work of building a life of happiness, and self compassion is no exception. The simplest way to do this is to take inventory of what your inner critic says to you. Here's an exercise to guide you. Get out a piece of paper and make a list of all the distinct areas of your life: relationship, partnership, friendships, body appearance, work, career, parenting, the past, the future. For each item on the list, ask yourself, what does my inner critic specifically say about me in this area? Identify which ones affect your life the most. Yes, all of them are probably cringe-worthy, but are there some that you are sure are affecting your happiness and overall well-being? There may be areas where your inner critic doesn't have much to say. Perhaps your job is on lockdown right now, or your relationship is in a great place. This isn't an invitation to make up things. If it doesn't apply, skip it. For the others, be open and honest about the messages you tell that undermine yourself. So, why in the world do I want to torture you and make you purge all the mean things your inner critic says to you? Because you can't clean things up if you can't specifically see where they are messy. Once you are aware of your inner critic, you are halfway to managing it and demonstrating compassion for yourself. That's why I want you and your inner critic to get to know each other really well, like intimately. Keep in mind that the list you made is about what's happening right now and it can change from week to week. If you embark on a new relationship or create new goals in your life, your inner critic will have all new rotten tomatoes to throw at you. It's not a bad idea to update your list regularly, so it can help steer you to a place of automatic awareness. You hear your inner critic talking and you immediately know what's happening instead of aimlessly sitting and stewing in it. A word on fear's throwdowns. Now that you know you can't stop your inner critic voice altogether and you are learning the tools to manage it, you might find yourself wanting to use that voice as your motivator. You might think if you speak more kindly to yourself and stop allowing yourself to be a whipping post, you might become a slacker. You need that inner critic to help you to keep kicking ass in your life, right? The thoughts might look like this. Oh, Janice lost 30 pounds recently. How inspiring. If she can do it, I can lose 40. I really was an idiot and screwed up that work project. I'll stay late and come in early for the next month and do a way better job next time. They'll see how awesome I can be. I know my husband is an ass man and my ass has seen better days. Amp up the squats, Miss Flat ass. Your inner critic is comparing you to others, saying you do better, pushing you to do better based on you falling short or failing, and using any shortcomings to try and make you a better person. You know where this is going, right? Ladies, let's be honest here. Your inner critic is being an asshole. Does this ever feel good? Unless you are a masochist. This isn't good for you. You know what always works to make you feel better and wins in the end? Love, kindness, and compassion, all directed to you. Giving yourself the internal beatdown might change your behavior on a dime at that moment. But I can assure you it is only in the short term ends up making you feel like shit and will diminish your self-confidence. This is important to understand because the inner critic is more than just thoughts running through your mind. Your inner critic is the voice that sends messages stemming from core beliefs you have about yourself. In those moments when you pick apart your body in the mirror or get in another fight with your partner and feel like it's your fault or make a mistake at work, ask yourself what you believe deep down to be true about yourself. Probably the answers sound a little like this. I'm not thin enough or pretty enough. I'll never be in a healthy relationship because I'm too hard to love. Everyone else has it figured out but me. I'm a fraud and soon everyone will know. Our inner critic seems to think its job is to remind us of those beliefs on a regular basis, and here's the kicker. It looks for and points out evidence of its truth. See, those pens are tight. I'm still enormous. See, another fight. I'm doomed to be alone. See, I screwed up at work again. Loser. For the love of Pete, it doesn't have to be this way. No one beats themselves up into happiness, success, good health, or a kick-ass life. The solution involves compassion, kindness, and slow work to change your thoughts and beliefs over and over again. Or believe the asshole of an inner critic and feel like shit. Your choice. Knowing your triggers. Some of your triggers may be obvious. You know your mother-in-law's critics of your parenting will make you feel crappy and angry. You know that following certain models or yogis on Instagram will make you feel inadequate. However, sometimes the triggers are sneaky. Down in the deep end of our souls, we have a biological need to belong. Therefore, it matters to us how people view us. I'll talk more about caring what everyone thinks of us in chapter 7 and 13. But here's an exercise that will demonstrate how much your inner critic is banking on you caring a lot about how you are perceived by others. Once again, make a list for each distinct area of your life. Under each one, write down a few words you would never ever want other people to use to describe you. For instance, in relationships, maybe you would never want to be seen by your partner as needy, hysterical, damaged, insecure, and boring. Maybe at work, you would never want to be seen by your boss and co workers as unqualified, irresponsible, and inexperienced. It's important to cover all the areas of your life. Don't skip or skimp, really show up. Then ask yourself what each of those perceptions means to you. Why is it so important to not be perceived by your partner as needy? This exercise isn't meant to change any of these thoughts you have, just to help you become aware that you have them. For the sake of sounding dramatic here, this tool has changed my life. I'm now able to recognize almost instantly when I'm beating myself up because I'm panicked about how others see me. For example, not long after I learned this exercise, I had booked an interview with a woman I admired and had wanted her on my podcast for a long time. She had asked for an afternoon slot, but afternoons are hard for me because my kids are home. Not impossible, but tricky. Against my better judgment, I said yes. A few days later, I was in the backyard playing with my kids when I got a notification on my phone at 3:05 that said, "Hey, are we still on for our 3 interview?" I thought, "Oh shit, OMG, OMG, OMG." I'd forgotten about our scheduled interview. I replied quickly, "I'm so sorry, give me 5 minutes." I threw some M&Ms and an iPad at my kids, told them to leave me alone for an hour and that their life depends on it, and ran upstairs to interview her. In those 5 minutes of getting ready, I dropped into my fears of her seeing me as unorganized, flaky, and inexperienced. I desperately wanted to explain myself to her and to myself, and I started beating myself up. I should have known better. She probably thinks I'm so stupid and a total idiot. I made a mistake and I jumped to attack myself. It was quick, it was dirty. But just as fast as it started, I saw it happening and I stopped. I told myself it was a mistake. It's not that big of a deal. Just apologize. It happens to everyone, literally. Everyone makes mistakes like this. That's it. Then I moved on. Notice I didn't feel the need to tell myself how awesome I was or how she didn't think those things about me. My mind knows when I'm trying to BS my way out of feeling bad. That never works. What I did was tell myself the truth, that everyone makes mistakes. The mistake wasn't that big of a deal. I can clean up the mess I made and that's it. Also, notice I'm not feeling bad about having the triggers in the first place. Triggers can run deep and they are a part of human nature. The key is to know when you are being triggered so you can see it and speak kindly to yourself. That's self-compassion. To summarize, the process of knowing your triggers and moving through them looks like this. Know your go-to triggers. Be aware of the specific fears you have about being seen a certain way. Get clear on them. If you are honest with yourself about your triggers in all areas of your life, then you will train your brain to notice when you are being unkind to yourself. Realize when you have been triggered, when you are vulnerable, you have made a mistake. You have an argument with someone, you're trying something new, you're likely to react. If you can identify your own reactions, you should quickly be able to stop the negative cycle. Start speaking to yourself with kindness. You don't have to go overboard here. Keep it to the point and cut yourself some slack. Practicing and committing. Truth. If you want to get a handle on your inner critic, Catch yourself in those moments and start to be compassionate towards yourself. You will have to commit to the process. You can't just read the words on these pages and let it happen magically. You pledge to do the work and keep doing the work until it becomes second nature. Women often ask me how long it took to go from regularly beating myself up to showing compassion towards myself. It's hard to nail down a time frame, but I think it was about 3 years before I noticed major changes in the way I spoke to myself on a regular basis. It was gradual over those years, but it would have never happened if I had just tried it for a few weeks and given up because I didn't see immediate and massive results. For some people, it takes less time. It's all about commitment. Take Julie, for instance. When I started working on my inner critic, I was both excited and nervous. Excited to work on something that had been holding me back for decades, and nervous that I would do it wrong. I made it a priority, and wouldn't you know it, I catch that sucker so fast as it tries to bring me down. I hear the voice now and I say, nope, not today, and move on. It's essentially changed my life for the better. I didn't expect all the tools in this chapter to resonate with you. Try them out and ignore the ones you don't like. Keep the ones you do like and the ones that help in your back pocket to use when you need them. It's to be expected that you will make your great progress in this area and then fall back again into your old habits. I often hear I was doing great, then I had a breakup and started trash talking to myself again. Life happens, struggle happens, and your inner critic likes those moments. Just watch out for them. That's your only job during those times.